Hello, Twin Eagles members. Doug Brown, General Manager, Chief Operating Officer, along with Mr. Mike Chafee, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant General Manager. I want to thank all of you who are taking the time to join us for the first of a series of educational sessions we'll be presenting for the membership. The session focuses on the club business model, and so we have Mr. John Iannuzzi, Treasurer and Chair of the Finance Committee, joining us as one of the panelists. We will be recording the sessions and posting them to the website for those members unable to participate. We understand there will be questions you may want to ask, so we encourage you to click on the Q&A bubble that's at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your question. We will be answering all of the questions that come in a future communication, which will have a link to the recorded message. If we have time to answer some of these questions, we will during the presentation, or actually probably at the end of the presentation. So prior to introducing our presenter for this session, Mike is going to take membership through the state of the club from the operational side of the equation based on both of our observations over the past 6 months. So Mike, you want to start that off, sir?
Absolutely. Thank you, Doug. As Doug mentioned, this is sort of the kickoff to our quarterly educational series, and it's an exciting program. It's something that we think is going to be very, very beneficial for the membership here. The whole intent and goal behind it is really to inform and educate the Twin Eagles membership on the unique aspects of the private club industry, certainly a unique business model, also how that relates to the operations here at Twin Eagles. We're also going to use these opportunities to update you on exactly what the team here is doing along with the board to help elevate your experience as members here at the club. When we talk about owners versus customers, I think that's certainly an important distinction and a big transition from what was a developer relationship with Ronto, where the members were customers, to now owners in being owners of Twin Eagles. And with that, I think it's important that the owners understand the industry, the operations, and the vision of the club. I think that's absolutely critical. And that's what we intend to achieve as we go through this. And when we talk about the idea of being owners, I think it's important to understand, as owners, we don't expect you to be involved in the detailed operations and privy to the confidential, detailed information. That certainly is for management and the board that you elect. But we certainly want you to be aware of the club, the vision of the club, and be supportive of the initiatives that we're looking to put in place to help elevate the lifestyle here at Twin Eagles. That is the intent behind the series of programming that will be rolling out. And certainly with today's kickoff session, I think it's a great one. It's the private club business model. As Doug mentioned, Dr. Jim Butler will be presenting. We're very fortunate to have Jim with us. Jim has been a great guide to Twin Eagles for the last few years since turnover. Today's session, we're going to focus on the industry best practices, key success factors from the top performing clubs. We're going to talk about capital versus operations, which is unique in the club industry. Typically you have operations driving net worth. Here in the club industry, we drive net worth through capital. Operations are designed to be a break even, and we use that to really deliver that member experience. So I think that's an important distinction that Jim will touch on. And I think perhaps what's most important with the information that Jim's going to share is that it's not Jim's opinion, and he'll reiterate this as he gets into his session. But it's fact, right? It's 100% data driven from the clubs that club benchmarking partners with across the country, and so that's what makes this information so critically valuable. And in order to put it in perspective, I think we have to sort of get a sense of where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. And so we know that Twin Eagles has been around for a number of years, roughly 23 years. The vision of Twin Eagles has changed. The developers at Twin Eagles have changed. We've gone from Colosimo to Bonita Bay to Ronto Group. and obviously now to membership ownership of the club. And with Ronto, Ronto came in, they were extremely successful in selling real estate here at Twin Eagles and did a lot of great things for the community. One thing to understand is that Ronto came in with the developer model, as you would expect. That is not the same model that we employ as member owners of the club. I think that's definitely an important distinction. So Ronto did well in what they came in to do. They certainly revitalized the community. They added amenities like the fitness center, the tiki, resort style pool. But again, they did it all with sort of one goal in mind, and that was selling real estate. So once they did that, they were able to hand off the club assets to the membership and go on their way. That whole model, their business plan, again, designed on selling real estate, is founded on, offering value, the discounted dues and subsidizing the operation, waiving initiation fees. Certainly, they're not interested in reserving for future capital needs that will be, the owner's responsibility. So certainly a different model than what we have in place today. And once we did reach turnover, it's certainly a wake-up call for the membership. And in every turnover, it's never perfectly clean. It's typically messy. There's a lot of ins and outs, and Jim will sort of touch on that as we get into his presentation. But the board has certainly done a good job in navigating that. But some of those challenges that we're still dealing with today, that we'll continue to deal with, are the poor organizational structure that was in place. That organizational structure that was in place was not designed to deliver that private club experience on the level that we intend to, and that's something that Doug and I and the board are working to redefine, and that is in process now. When we look at the operational structure, the items that are necessary, the tools that are necessary for the staff members to be successful, those policies, those procedures, those protocols, those are things that were not in place. We're building those now. But in order for us to be successful and consistently deliver on the member experience, those are absolutely critical and essential. We talk about that developer model transitioning to that owner model, and the significant deferred maintenance and capital needs as a component of that. And that's something, we talk about the club, being handed over to the membership, which is great. But part of that challenge is, with that club comes a lot of deferred maintenance, right? And that deferred maintenance now becomes the responsibility of the owners of Twin Eagles. And Twin Eagles is sort of in a unique situation in that its lifespan was significantly longer than most of the developer turnovers that you see. It's not in that 5 to 7 range. The clubhouse facilities are dated. We're talking 20 years from the inception of the community to the turnover. So with that, again, comes significant deferred maintenance, to the tune of multi millions of dollars that then fall to the responsibility of the owner residents. And so how that shakes out in total cost of ownership, we can see that down below when we look at what has happened, since turnover in your dues level. Certainly under that Ronto model, as we mentioned, that wasn't designed to fund CapEx in future capital replacement. That was designed to fund operations and to some extent be subsidized by the developer, by Ronto. So we go from 12.8, to what we're looking at in FY21 of roughly 17.8. So an increase of approximately 40% from FY18 to FY21. So that is definitely a big increase. And what's driving that is the need to invest in our capital infrastructure. And it's critically important, now that ownership lies with the members. It is the members' responsibility to be able to fund that capital, fund the facilities, the amenities, drive that member experience, because ultimately it's all linked to property values, and it's our obligation to sustain and drive property values. And Jim will talk about the importance of really driving that capital engine And when you look across the club industry and you look at those clubs that do deliver that excellence that you expect, they drive that capital engine. They excel at it. They overfund depreciation expense on an annual basis. And so these are some of the factors that have sort of led to that increase in that dues level, and looking for opportunities to be able to drive that capital engine is critically important. We look at the implementation of initiation fees in this current year. That is absolutely critical. That's a big one that's going to help take some of that burden to fund this deferred maintenance off the backs of today's members, right? And so we're going to be able to collect that from the new owners coming in. And these are not, unusual, but they are challenges, and certainly to the extent and magnitude that we're facing them at Twin Eagles. We've done a good job, the board, the finance committee, those charged with governance, and navigating through these issues, in a short time, in just the 2 years. Turnover, Twin Eagles is ultimately a complete startup, right? And so we're putting everything in place that's necessary for Twin Eagles to become successful. And we look at the reality of the situation and where we're at today. Twin Eagles ultimately is a below average performing private club, if we're honest with ourselves. I think we all know that. When we look at our operating dues in the value equation, the value equation is out of balance. And although we have benchmarking, we benchmark versus RSM and the industry averages, our peer groups, et cetera. Ultimately, that benchmarking gives us a good idea of where the market's at and how we stack up against it. It's our vision that truly drives that dues level. We don't want to lose sight of that, but we use this just to keep us in perspective and give us a good idea where we stack up. And so you look at our operating dues level, and we're really in the range of where we should be when you look at us in comparison to our peer group and the local club market. But where we're out of line is that member experience. And so we're not delivering on the level that we need to. Inconsistent, mediocre at best. The other clubs in our peer group outperform what we do here. And that will change. Absolutely. The good takeaway from this is that, our dues level is at a level significant enough to support that member experience. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is our challenge with our experience isn't a dues issue. It's an experience issue. It's a service issue. And that's something that we'll be correcting here. When we look at, just exactly where we're out of line with the industry and where those dues dollars need to be reinvested, it's pretty evident, and that'll show up in Jim's presentation as well. The hospitality industry is driven on service. Service is delivered by employees. And when you look at our payroll numbers and payroll as a percentage of operating revenue or payroll per FME, we're out of line with our peer group and with industry standards. So just to put it in perspective, our payroll as a percentage of our operating revenue that we'll see on Jim's slides comes in at roughly 54%. If we take into account the legacy allocation, that actually drops that number down to 52%, where we should be to be comparable with the level of experience that we're trying to deliver is roughly 58 to 60%. So that is clearly an area that's going to be emphasis for both Doug and I as we start to build this leadership team. And we talk about the plan to get it there, to get the experience to the level that it needs to be. And it's 100% about building that leadership team and driving culture. Filling leadership seats, right now we have the director of golf position that we're out searching through the PGA, filling that position with an executive level talent, certainly bringing in someone who's going to understand the vision of where we're going, align with the values, and help us take the organization to that level, help mentor and develop staff members, team members, and embrace exactly what we're about. That is critical. We're looking to do that across the board. We're delineating between our executive team, senior management team, we look at food and beverage and we talk about director of food and beverage. That is a critical position that you'll find at any successful food and beverage operation within the private club industry. Certainly something that is essential and critical to delivering the experience that the Twin Eagles membership expects. You know, across the board, senior management team, we're looking at areas where we can maximize our staff's talent, right? And make sure that they're in the right positions to be successful. So another area where, and actually there'll be a communication going out later this afternoon, but we were fortunate to be able to bring Jenna Martinez on board as our director of membership. She's very talented professional, ton of experience, and is really going to elevate the level of Twin Eagles to where we need to be. With that gives us the opportunity to shift our director, our current director of membership, Amy, over into an activities coordinator role, which is much needed here at Twin Eagles. So creates this opportunity for us to really get this structure in place. There's going to be an intense focus on recruiting, certainly retention. A lot of our staff is new. You know, we have very few members or management team members who have been pre-turnover are still with us. So we're still trying to work through that, define that culture. Same with our hourly staff. A lot of them are new since turnover. The tenure here, that history, that culture just doesn't exist. So that's what we're working on building. That's going to be built through training, development, executive coaching. Our goal is for our executive team to function as leaders and for our senior management team to grow into leaders. And we'll be providing them with the skills and tools necessary to get there. Ultimately, we'll be creating an environment with engaged and empowered employees that understand the experience that we're trying to deliver and are united around one purpose and one vision, and that's to deliver excellence in member service here at Twin Eagles. We look at club industry education, similar to what we're doing with the membership. We're doing the same with the board and the committees to make sure that we all understand this model. And then, as important, if not more important, with our team members here. You know, when we look at the makeup of our team members, we don't have many team members that have experience in the club industry or significant experience in the club industry. And so it's hard to deliver on an experience that you may not understand. And so it's up to us to give them the tools that they need to be successful. And it's exciting. What's most exciting is it's underway, you know, and we're starting to see the benefits of it now. We'll be rolling out a culture program and driving that through all levels of staff, all the way down to the frontline service individuals. And it's going to pay big dividends. That's going to be the foundation that elevates Twin Eagles to that next level. So we're certainly excited to move in that direction. And ultimately, that end result is going to be that elevated member experience and reinstating value into your Twin Eagles membership. So with that, Doug, I'll turn it back over to you. Oh, Doug, I think you're on mute.
That would definitely help. Thank you, Mike. So did you touch base on the food and beverage director? Because I think that's a key component that we're going to be looking at and really focusing on food and beverage.
Yes. I mentioned that we are going to be bringing in a director of food and beverage. That's a critical component. Certainly needs CEO executive leadership within the food and beverage department. Someone who's capable of going out and running their own restaurant. We need that talent level here, and that is definitely a top priority.
Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to mention it twice because that is a area that we are hyper focusing on, to be honest, with the membership. So, as Mike said, education. Well, why does a member need to be educated? They know how to be a member. The membership needs to understand they need to understand the club operations so they can better understand the rationale of the decisions that management have been and will be making as we go forward to meet the expectations of the membership. This session is going to focus on the private club business model and how it compares to Twin Eagles. The club industry is a highly unique business. And I do want to emphasize this is a business. So, with that said, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Jim Butler, CEO of Club Benchmarking. Jim was a highly respected general manager in the club industry for over 35 years, spending 34 years at two different clubs, matter of fact, in the Naples area, prior to establishing Club Benchmarking. Club Benchmarking is the leading club analytic and business intelligence company in the world. And they specialize in dining, city clubs, yacht clubs, golf clubs, and country clubs. So, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Mike, for that. And John, also, it's a real honor to be here today with you. I've had the two honors, really, an honor of when the club was starting to look at turnover and deciding how they were going to handle that. I was able to come in and talk to the board about that. And then secondly, I've been in the Southwest Florida market, as Doug mentioned, since 1985. So I've seen the club industry go through this. And then from my personal background, I've gone through this two times, and I've had the pleasure of working for the members equal amount of time as I had with the developers, and stayed with the club post-developer, which is unusual, I think, in the club market, as many people would tell you. During that process down here, I also was able to go to the Luckert School for Real Estate Development and Finance. I worked for the Colliers, so obviously development and finance were an important part of that. And then I started in golf. I started in Michigan, actually, as an assistant golf pro, worked at the Moors of Portage, for those of you familiar with Michigan golf, which is a great Art Hills golf course up there, and then came down to Florida. And unfortunately, we lost a superintendent there, and I really, as a golf person, thought I knew about growing grass, and it was quickly pointed out to me that I didn't know. So I did go to get a turf grass degree, because I felt like it was really important to be able to talk that language, especially in this market as we go forward. Today, I think we'll have some fun today. I think I will challenge you on some of the thoughts that you think you might know about the club industry. As Mike said, nothing that I will say today will be based on my opinion without data. I'll support it every step of the way. And if it is my opinion, I'll tell you it's my opinion on that. We're very particular about that in terms of when we talk publicly about that. I'll share the perspective of Twin Eagles today from our perspective at Club Benchmarking. I'm going to walk through some of the turnover challenges specifically, and what the members had to face as they looked at turnover, and the job that the board and the finance committee and the members did with that. I think you had a 97.5% approval rate to turn the club over. And can you imagine that? Do you think you get 97% of the members to agree on anything? Right? It's, I couldn't get them to agree that this was a blue shirt at 97%. So that's something to be really proud of. But at that time, you shifted from a customer of Veronto to an owner of the club, and you took over a $40 million investment in terms of that, in addition to the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of that real estate. And we're going to look at that as we go there. And we'll talk about the private club business model, because the private club business model from an operating standpoint is a non-profit business model. Your goal, as Mike said, is not to drive money through operations, but your goal is to drive membership satisfaction and loyalty through operations while creating tremendous experiences about that. And I'll show you some data that we have in terms of what we do as a company. And then we're going to talk a lot about talent. Michael talked about 60% of your expense, between 50 and 60% in our industry, is based on talent. And you're in the most competitive market in the country. There's 160 clubs down here on the Immokalee Road. There's got to be 20 or 30 lined up right next to Twin Eagles. depending on if the employees are coming from Golden Gate to Fort Myers to San Carlos, anywhere they're coming, they're going to have to drive by numerous other clubs to come there, not to mention we're in a town of 2 Ritz-Carltons. We're in a town of, the Beach Club is getting ready to go, and they're bringing a premier vendor in to do that. So we're in a really competitive market, and we all know about the $15 an hour issue going on in the state of Florida and the impact that's going to have on us. Then we're going to talk about the food and beverage, what we call the food and beverage trap. And that trap is that you're trying to make money in food and beverage, and I'll show you the data that shows that that's completely not true from an industry standpoint. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. The best food and beverage amenities are subsidized by the members. The ones that make money in food and beverage predominantly are the ones with the biggest financial challenges. And I think after the presentation, it'll make sense. And then we'll do some, if we have time, we'll do some Q&As. But if we don't have time, we will answer those Q&As for you and get that out to the members as we go forward. My partner at Club Benchmarking is Ray Cronin, and he's a Boston guy. And I love this saying, right? If we have data, let's look at the data. If we only have opinions, let's go with mine. And that was kind of the basis of our company. Ray he belonged to the board and the club up at Thorny Lee in Boston, and they were arguing in the Greens Committee about how much money that one of the other clubs up in the Boston area was spending on golf course maintenance. But at the end of the day, nobody knew how much it was. One of the Greens Committee members said, I don't know how much it is. I just know that it was more than what we're spending. And the reality is that doesn't work, right? That doesn't work in today's data-driven world. But the private industry is very tough because we don't go out and take the financials of Twin Eagles and blast them all over the Naples market so that everybody can see what that is. A private club is just that. It's private. So what we do is we take detailed trial balances from the industry and we aggregate that data and we compare it in an apples to apples format in terms of what our chart of accounts are at Club Benchmarking, because every club counts differently. Can you imagine how Twin Eagles counts? They've had, from the Ronto group to the club, you had to create your own chart of account in order to do that. And within the industry, as we speak today, there is not a standard within the Club Managers Association. The standard that we use, we set one at Club Benchmarking, and we take all these clubs, and we have over 1,000 clubs all across North America and really the world. We also work in Asia, and we work over in Scotland and Europe. And we look at that and really try to study that data and see what it says. And we've come up with what are the important key indicators, key performance indicators in order to understand the private club industry. This is a very fragmented industry. If we look how Twin Eagles runs, the basis of Twin Eagles is different than the other clubs along that corridor. So without studying it, it's very hard to do any comparison. And we want to base it on fact, not on opinion. And in order to do that, we have to look at the best practices and we have to look at a strategic board as we go, and you have to change. Twin Eagles has been around for 23 years. When it came out of the ground as a Bonita Bay property, it was a high-end Bonita Bay property, I believe, with under 300 residential units for the 2 golf courses when it was originally done. Went through the bankruptcy. Ronto came in, and what did they do? They changed the business plan because the market changed in terms of that. They added units, they invested in new amenities, and now the members take it, and we have to create it from zero also. You have to change in time, and we encourage our clubs to really think like owners and not customers. Within your own business structure, we're going to spend some time on what the differences are in terms of owners versus customers, but it's very important that we have that vision about who we want to be and what we want to be in the future. and driving that real estate forward and driving that commitment forward as we go. I grabbed these off the internet, these 3 pictures. So we talked in 2010, Ronto purchases Twin Eagles from the Bonita Bay Group. And I think if you didn't know that as public information, in the paper they said they bought it for $11 million. Come 2019, members negotiated and had a transition from the developer to the membership. The club turned over. You had the beautiful $47 million clubhouse. And we fast forward today, and the members come out with a member enhancement plan, phase 1, June 2020. And I believe that is somewhere between $20 and $30 million, $22 million in your audited financial information. This is a big business as we go through, and this business changes as we change from a developer model to a member model to an investment model, which you're about to undertake here in spades between the golf course and the clubhouse coming up. And each of those different phases is a different business plan as we go forward. The first question you might want to say is, why are club turnovers really tough in terms of that? And there's many reasons for that, but a couple that I'm going to talk about is the first one is that the developer model is different. They use the club as a loss leader to attract members and gain economic value when the real estate is sold, and the real estate sales exceed that operational expense. That is the developer business model. That is not the business model of a standalone or gated community. As a matter of fact, in the majority of gated communities and standalone clubs, the clubs do not share in any of that real estate money that comes up. And just to frame that, the changing from 300 units in Twin Eagles to over 700 is 400. And if the median home price is between $700,000 and $800,000, it's not uncommon for a developer to create $350 to $400 million of value. And typically a developer is looking to make somewhere around 20%. And I'm sure we have members in the development game in the audience. So developers are looking to make tens of millions of dollars off that. And that's why they're able to subsidize the operation in terms of that. The other thing in a developer model is that the facilities are fully built. So they're not really interested in what that reoccurring capital income is needed to sustain the club. At turnover, the good news is we acquired the club for little money down. The bad news is we don't get that real estate to subsidize it from a developer. So we've got 2 challenges and 2 significant challenges when we take over the club. The operating model, number 1, in this industry for private clubs is break even. So we're going to consume that, and I'll show you the data that shows that consumption and what that really means over the lifetime economic value for an individual member. And then number 2, the little known fact or the little dirty secret in clubs is that they are multi-million-dollar operations, and the biggest line on your balance sheet is net property, plant, and equipment. And I'll share that with you. And we have to keep up with that. We have to have a capital engine to drive that as we go forward. And we can't just swing the checkbook one time and have that happen. It doesn't happen that way. And we'll talk about that in detail. So as we go, that economic value in the private club for a not-for-profit club is driven by that engine, that capital engine, not for operations. And this is that role change from customers to owners. We have to create the best clubs in the country, have 2 things that go for them, and that is they drive that capital income as they go forward, and they create membership value as they go forward for that. I want to talk specifically about some of the differences between a developer and a member-owned, because you might not have ever thought about it. Number 1 is the advertising and the marketing. For a developer, they're real estate based. You open up the Sunday paper, you look at the homes for sale, in there. You look at all the television ads that are in there. Those are all developer based. They're using the club as an amenity to drive those real estate sales. They're getting those real estate commissions from the real estate office. There's a marketing fee, many cases in the sales of that, and that all goes towards driving that advertising and marketing budget. In the club at turnover, there really isn't an advertising or marketing budget. Member-owned clubs are very dependent on the word of mouth. Over half of the new members in the clubs come from the other members through word of mouth, and that's why that member experience is so important to us. And we don't get any marketing fees in the typical club as we go forward. In a developer club, it's one of many businesses. Ronto, for example, is in many communities around the Naples market in Southwest Florida. It's one of many businesses that they have. When the club turned over, the standalone club is it. The board of governors, the board of directors is in charge of that. That's the primary business. That's the only business that the club owns as it goes forward. The capital from a developer is driven by that real estate. They write the check. They write that $11 million check, and that was mainly the only check that they had to worry about going forward. When they came in, first thing they did was invest in some capital. They paid for that through whatever if they were part of a private equity or a VC or just individually owned, they get to write that check and go forward. Members were not on the hook for that. When the club turns over, the only way to create capital is to generate it through the owners, which are the members in terms of that. And we'll talk more specifically about that as we go forward. On the financial side, the operations from a developer model is subsidized. They're willing to lose money to try and create $300, $400, $500 million in real estate sales. It only makes sense when you're selling homes from $500,000 to $4 million that you're able to subsidize that because you make the money on that sale. On a member-owned club, there's generally none of that. We're trying to break even. We have to come up with cash through the capital side of that. On memberships in a developer model, we get to sell new. We sell new homes. We sell new memberships. We grow our balance sheet by selling new memberships and new homes. That's way different than a member-owned model, which is only on resale. There's very few new homes left, if any, within the community. So the business model within the community is resale in a market where there's hundreds of thousands of units for sale on a retail basis. When we develop new projects, we go ahead and build them. When we do it from a members, we get a member vote. We run a democracy from the members, one member, one vote, and we're basically in the renovation business, not new construction business. And then we talked about the real estate new sales versus the resales. Are we involved in the resales agent, or do we have outside real estate agents? Most of the time, the clubs deal with outside real estate agents, so that marketing message is done by an outsider versus in a developer model. In new sales, it's generally speaking, the real estate people work for the developer, and the decision making is way different. In the member-owned clubs, we have the members, the customers, they get to make the decisions, and a developer, it's one voice in terms of that. So this is where these are fundamental differences in that. During the last survey we asked the question, the club's impact on my real estate is what percent of your real estate value is based on the club. And according to the members, over 510 of members said it was 16% more. The second biggest category was 10 to 15%. So when you look at the 700 units, 600 to 700 units in the community, the vast majority of you believe that the club has somewhere between a 10 and 16% or more impact on the real estate values within the community. And you have $500 million of real estate within the community there. So it's very significant as we go forward. Now, what are some of those challenges specifically at the club? At turnover, the club had zero capital dues because the developer did not have a capital dues model. The majority of clubs in our database have capital due. So we were starting from zero. Twin Eagles was starting from zero. Number two, the initiation fees for the clubs at turnover, the club had zero in terms of the initiation fees. Most of the clubs in the Naples market have initiation fees. So the two biggest sources of capital at turnover, Twin Eagles was starting at zero. The transfer fees were fundamentally zero at turnover. I'll show you a chart where there was a few $1,000s there, but it was really minuscule in terms of that. And from operations, we're a break even or a subsidized operation at turnover. So that capital side, we got to start from zero, and we had to build this up as we go. And I think the club's done a terrific job of doing that. And certainly the members have been supportive of that as we've gone forward. The other thing at turnover is how do we handle that deferred maintenance? The clubhouse at 47,000 square feet, the two golf courses needed work to be able to do that. So we have to create capital engines to do that starting from zero. From a governance standpoint, the club's 3 years old. As Mike said, it's a brand new startup. We have to build a sustainable model in governance. And we're going to talk about the governance model. It's a challenging governance model in terms of how we do, because we are operated and owned by the members and we are managed by professionals in terms of that. But the board changes substantially a lot every other year. So the continuity comes in the private club business from management and personnel. And that's really an important model in terms of that governance when we talk about it. And then finally, how do we recruit, train, and develop that staff in the most competitive market in the country? For a startup at 3 years old, I looked at that. We're doing a employee engagement survey, and from management, 17 managers or people that were on salaries answered that, and one of those managers had been at the club longer than 5 years. So 1 out of 17 understands the culture and the history from being there and living that. It's a startup, so we've got to build that, and this is why turnovers can be challenging as we go forward. We belong to an organization called Club Leadership, and Copland, Keebler, McMahon Group, and Club Benchmarking are part of that. And the club business model, we believe, starts with the vision. You have to have the talent, you have to understand the data, you have to have great facilities, you have to have great operations, you have to put your processes in, and it's a continuous circle, all being served by managing, operating, and governing as we go forward. And we have to create that as we go forward. I love this model in the private club industry because I think in terms of models, it really explains the private club business. Up at the top is the financial position and sustainability of the club. And right below that is that membership engine. That membership engine is how many members do we have? How much do they pay? And what is their motivation, attachment, satisfaction, value? How does that work out? We're in the dues business. I'm going to talk about that. But that member, we're privately owned. We're owners that should be concerned about growth equity versus customers who are concerned about price and cost. In order to hold up that membership engine, there's 4 pillars to that. On the left pillar is that staff engagement. How do we recruit the best possible staff we can in a seasonal business? It's one of the biggest challenges being in the Southwest Florida market is continuously staff engagement. The turnover in the club business as a whole is 70% a year. The best clubs have a turnover margin of 40%. So can you imagine trying to deliver 5-star service where between 40 and 70% of your staff are brand new every year? That's an issue in all clubs. Secondly is that physical plant and that balance sheet. I love this presentation because it really focuses on that, and hopefully we can learn something on that. Next is that programming of member services and amenities. Who would have ever thought 5 years ago that pickleball would take Naples by storm and how diverse programming has been. Art, travel groups, wine clubs, all the things that have been added from a programming service in the last 10 years in that Naples market. Finally, that other pillar is that real estate. It's the net worth for you on an individual basis when you live in the community. It's a very important part of that. And it's all supported by a governance model that we get to change the governors yearly, a high percentage of the governors every year over, and that's a very difficult model. So therefore we have to commit to the training and the orientation and creating that owner mentality so that when we have new members come onto the board, that they can hit the ground running, because they're not going to be on the board very long. So it's very important that we do these presentations and build that future board members up as we go forward. The factors are, your current financial position as a result of the past choices. And you had to live with some of those. Some of those choices were from Ronto, where they gave away, which was great for the real estate sales. They included a membership in every purchase of that. They subsidized the operations. The bad news for the club going forward is that's not a model that works from a capital standpoint, because the members are on the hook for the capital in terms of being an owner, and we have to figure that out as we go forward. We have to build that membership core based on the club staff, assets, and programs. You got to have member services and amenities that the members love. Michael talked about it. We've got to get the operations to a point where we're best of class in terms of that. And we do these satisfaction surveys so we can see what our members want. Members have a very different view on satisfaction. It's really important that you understand what motivates every member. As a matter of fact, even the men and the women have different motivation. New members and older members have different motivations, and we can carve that up and build programming around that. And we talk about reinvestment in the clubs. When I look around the Naples market and I see these clubs investing tens of millions of dollars, the first time I was sitting in my office in 2006 and I heard that a club on the East Coast was investing $10 million, I about fell out of my chair. I was like, there is no way a club will ever invest 10 million. And here we are today in the Naples market. If you don't invest north of 10 million, you're falling behind. And that's, again, there's lots of data to support that. And then finally, the staff engagement and how important staff is. We know through the surveying that the member staff relationship in a private club is absolutely critical. So what are we paying the staff? Are we trying to pay the staff to have best of class staff and create the culture that we want going forward? It's very important that we do that as we go forward, because our mission is very simple, right? We got to create and nurture and evolve this member experience that is so compelling that people are beating the doors down to live in the community and join the club and be part of this unbelievable member experience. But in order to have an unbelievable member experience, I'm going to tell you, you got to have a couple things. Number one, you got to have best of class staff. And in order to have best of class staff, you better have best of class payroll and recruitment and retention in terms of that. Two, you have to have best of class facilities. And best of class facilities go hand in hand with satisfaction. It's very hard to achieve superior satisfaction in Naples without having superior facilities. And I think we all know what those are, right? Those are great golf, right? There's 160 courses from Nicholas to Pete Dye in this area, Fazio, best of class golf. You got to have great golf, it's given. You got to have great food and beverage. It's got to be compelling. You got to have great casual outdoor dining. You got to have great bar experience. Pools and tennis and fitness, all these things that belong from a compelling standpoint. And we've got to have enough capital to invest to keep it fresh and up to date, because it's a competitive situation. If we don't have that strong capital engine in this market, we're not competitive with our neighbors. And that's and I'll show that as we go forward. I'll use the data to show that. And it's a tension of opposites. As Mike said, do we fit the vision to the budget, or do we create a budget to drive the vision as we go forward? The best clubs have a clear vision and then create their budget off of that as they go forward. Now I'm going to shift a little bit, and I'm going to shift into a data perspective as we go here, but I've got to do a little bit of background work from explanation point. So there's two budgets in the club world, and I'm going to talk about them in terms of the operating budget, which is that the operating dues fund that predominantly, and then there's a capital budget or capital ledger that is funded by capital dues, initiation fees, assessments, and debt. Now, with those two ledgers, that operating ledger and that capital ledger, this is where the money goes as a member. So on the left, that operating ledger, most of the money drives the day-to-day experience. It's consumed. At the end of the year, there's not a lot of money left over. Sometimes you lose a little bit, sometimes you make a little bit, but it's budgeted fundamentally at break even. It keeps the grass green, keeps the beer and wine cold, keeps the food hot. It's consumed in and out every year. And if the operating ledger, if there's too little money there, the membership experience declines, because in order to run operations, we have to have money in order to do that. We have to have operating money to do that. On the right side, the capital ledger is the money that drives the financial income. By definition, if the left side, the operating ledger, is break even, then in order to grow our business, the capital ledger has to grow. And what that means is that we have money to invest back in to plant, property, and equipment, and that shows up as membership equity on the balance sheet. And I'll show you specifically the Twin Eagles balance sheet. And what we see is if there's too little money and the net worth declines and the footprint doesn't expand, the assets become depleted and irrelevant over time. And there's hundreds of examples around the country we do that. And at turnover, in most turnover communities, the capital side is the one, because the developer has the obligation to keep it up to date, but they don't have the incentive to reinvest in it, to build new in terms of that, unless it's going to drive future sales. And once you have turnover in your sites, then that capital ledger side is going to be felt. Now, one of the things that we hear in clubs is that every club thinks they're unique, and they are unique in terms of staff and membership, but they're not unique in terms of what the business plan. I just want to spend a minute on this because this will surprise you. And that is, independent of location, scale, or quality, it doesn't matter in terms of the sources of money or the uses of money. And again, that's not my opinion. That's what the data shows. The key performance indicators don't change based on location, scale, or quality in terms of that. And that's why we do ratio analysis. And I have a whole presentation with 80 slides that I can prove that on, but it doesn't matter in terms of if you're in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is where I grew up, or if you're in Rochester, New York, where my family grew up, or if you're in Naples, Florida, the key performance indicators are the same. Circumstances have an effect on it, but choices are much more important. And I'm going to talk about that specifically in food and beverage. And we talk about the culture's unique, but the financial drivers aren't. On the top line there is the operation, and we fund that from operating dues, and we use that for food and beverage, all the user fees. This is all of our income that comes in on the operating side. We use that money for overhead, for G&A, for building operations, for those fixed charges. We use it for the golf and the non-golf, sports and recreation, education, spa and fitness, and wellness. On the capital side, our sources of money are initiation fees, recurring capital dues, assessments, sale of assets, leases. Those are all the sources of that. And on the right side, the capital uses of those monies are asset maintenance and replacement, or increased capacity services and amenities. And we like to use the term obligatory capital for asset maintenance and replacement, and aspirational capital for that asset expansion as we go forward. Now, from which pocket do I pay for my experience? On the left side is that dues, which is 100% margin. And on the right side are all the fees that we have, which all have margin or expenses in terms of that. $1 in dues means we have $1 to run the club. $1 in fees doesn't mean we have $1 to run the club. As a matter of fact, that dollar in most cases in the club industry is subsidized by every department, and thus that's why we have dues. I'm going to use this as an example, and this is not Twin Eagles numbers, but this is the average club in our database. And let me just explain the chart there. So you can see where the operating ledger is and the capital ledger. So in our database across the country, the dues are $8,200. The typical member spends $5,400 for a total per year of $13,667. On average, they're a member for 20 years. So if you do the multiplication on that, they give the club $273,333 over a 20-year period. If we shift to the right side, the capital ledger, capital dues across the country at the median are $768 a year. Initiation fee at the median is $30,000. Assessments are $156 a month, or a total of that from the dues and the assessments on the capital side is $24.24. If you do the math on that, over the lifetime of a member, they create $48,474. And if you add those two numbers together, the member generates for the club $321,807. That's a stunning number, isn't it, in terms of that? And at Twin Eagles and in South Florida, that number is even more. It's double that in terms of that, because the dues are higher and the members spend more money than that at the club. But using those proportions, 85% of that expense from the members comes from those operating dues and is spent on those usage fees. Only 15% comes from the capital ledger. At the end of that 20-year period, that $273,333 that is generated on the operating side that went to the club keeps absolutely zero of that money. So the member, it's all 100% consumed. It goes into the member experience. On the right side in that 20-year period, that money goes to and is invested either in conditions of the club facilities, and we can map that out in terms of that. But the point is this, is that as capital stewards, that operating ledger on the left side, the life of the member to move the club forward doesn't move forward from the operating side because it's consumed. All 273 of that is consumed. The right side is the money that the club has to invest back in that. And as a steward of the club, the members have an obligation to leave the facility in good or better shape than they found it, because you want to drive that next buyer on to be able to buy your home at a higher value. And we know that those two things are related. And I love that slide in order to do that. And if that 15% was 20% on the capital ledger in terms of that investment on the proportion of the grand total, that the average club would have $12 million more dollars in physical assets or less debt on their balance sheet. It's on the margin that we can do that. And this is why capital is so important to the club as we go forward. Now, I'm going to summarize what 5 critical financial concepts are in the club here. Number one, we're in a high fixed cost business and expenses aren't bad. And if you think about this from a member standpoint, operating expenses are what drives that membership experience. We have to have operation expenses to drive breadth and quality. We have yet to see a club that is able to cut expenses and increase member services and membership satisfaction in terms of that. Twin Eagles is the most expensive it's ever been in the history of the club, and they had one of the greatest membership years that we ever had. If cutting expenses was a great idea in the club business, then the clubs that have the lowest amount of dues and the least expenses would be the healthiest and have the most members, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Number two, we are driven by the owners, by the members. They run the business. It is really important that we understand this business and that we don't imprint the knowledge of the for-profit industry from the members that come into this. Inventory control in the golf shop is important to the golf pro and to the finance committee, but it's not a financial driver in the club. And again, the data supports that. That's just one of that as we go forward. The third concept is we've got to grow net worth over time. We believe at Club Benchmarking is the single most important metric as we go forward. Number four, do you know what the balance sheet is? Do you understand that and how it impacts that? And number five is we compete on value, not on price. And the members are responsible for funding the club that it can successfully compete over time. We've got to create an increased membership value as we go forward. We put the industry into three buckets: the red bucket, yellow bucket, and green bucket. And when we look at it, the numbers put them into these three categories. And what we find is that the green bucket clubs are the ones that are growing. They have a full membership roster. They have really strong balance sheets. We've seen that in COVID. One of the reasons that Twin Eagles has done so well is that because of that strength in that balance sheet. That compound annual growth rate is growing at over 5%. Governance is focused on making the club better. You don't have time as governors, as committees, as finance committees, as members. We got to figure out this capital engine as we go forward to compete in this market and create a very compelling member experience as we go on. We've got to think like owners. The red bucket clubs have a weak member experience. They have a very narrow breadth, lackluster services and amenities. They have weak balance sheets. They always have deferred capital investment. They have lack of capital reserves. They're focused on the operations and not the strategy of the business, and the members think like customers, not as owners, and they're not educated in terms of what the business model of clubs are as we go forward. Now, in terms of the ledgers, I'm going to show this term net worth, and this is where it's really important in terms of what is the most important financial metric in the industry, and that's that blue circle on the bottom right, change in net worth. On the left, from the operating ledger, the net operating result of the club goes, if you have an operating surplus, that's going to slide up to the top over to the capital ledger side and go into capital income. If you have an operating deficit, the members are either going to have to come out of pocket or we're going to use capital dollars to support that operations, which we don't believe is the best practice. But when we take on the capital side, if the left side of this equation is zero, then the amount of money to invest in the club, or if we're going to grow our change in net worth, we have to have net available capital, which is our capital income at the top of the right screen, that we adjust for net operating result. We subtract leases because we treat leases as capital expenses. And if that number is bigger than depreciation, then our net worth goes up, and that's the money that you can put back into the club. So this is a very simple way of looking at it, but it's very powerful. So a club on the left, where that net available capital money, or that money that they have to invest in the facilities, is less than depreciation, the business, the net worth of that business is going down. On the right, that green arrow points up is when the capital that you have, that net available capital, is greater than depreciation, then your net worth is growing up. And net worth requires the incoming members and the existing members to contribute capital through those sources that we looked at. This chart represents the club industry. The blue line is the net operating margin, and this represents that the club industry operates on a net operating margin of break even. At club benchmarking, we call that from +4 to -4% in operations. On the capital, which is the gold line on top, that's the capital income to operating revenue. It's a metric that Mike mentioned. And what you'll see is that the median club in the industry makes 1% on their net operating margin. It makes hardly any money. The capital income to operating revenue, the median club has 15% capital income to revenue. Best of class over at that 75th percentile is 20% of revenue. It's a metric we look at. The clubs that are in the 20 and above have money to reinvest in the clubs. Over on the left side, the clubs that are less than 9% and actually less than 11% are capital starved clubs because they don't have enough to even keep up with depreciation. But the point is this: net operating margin does not move the club forward. Capital income moves the club forward. Now, we love at Club Benchmarking to look at balance sheets, and this is the balance sheet of Twin Eagles. And this is on the left side is October 31st, 2020, and on the right side is 2019. I want to point out just a couple things to talk about this. Balance sheets and clubs are very simple, right? So let's start at the top there. And under assets, if we look at the current assets in October 31st of 2020, the Twin Eagles had 10.9 million in current assets, which the vast majority of that was cash and cash equivalents at 7.5 million. And he had 2.9 million in accounts receivable because of the dues there as we go forward. When we go down to the board designated replacement capital fund and operating fund, you had over $3 million in that. So you had $13 million in terms of between the 3.1 million and the 10.9 in the assets. If we look at that $29 million line, that's property and equipment net. So out of the $43 million business, your total assets are 29 million of those. And if we added cash into that, and I just count that 7.5 million as cash, 7.5 million plus 29 million, 36 out of the 43 million are represented on two line items. If we are in the property, plant, and equipment business, $29 million worth of that, of the 43 million. It's stunning, right? Now, when we talk about net worth of the club, and we go down there, you can see that arrow points down there. It's called net assets year on year, and we look at club benchmarking. If the right number in 19, that 31,875,000 is bigger or smaller than the 2020 number of 32,235,000 at the bottom of the screen. So the net worth last year increased at Twin Eagles on the balance sheet. And the reason for that is that you took in more capital income than your depreciation number, so your net worth increased. So that's the equation that we look forward. When we shift over to the statement of activities from the balance sheet, again, I'm going to start up at the top. When we look at the membership dues number for 2020, Twin Eagles took in 8.6 million out of the total $12 million of revenue. So out of the $12 million of revenue, 8.6 million comes from membership dues. We are in the membership dues business as we go forward. When we look at depreciation, which is on the statement of activities here, we had to generate more than $1.368 million. If you can see that from about the fourth line up on the left. And we can see depreciation increase from the year before, which was $1,072,000 in 2019. We've got to cover that depreciation number in order to grow that net worth. And as you can look at those individual departments lose money, and that's why we have membership dues as we go forward. And I'm going to talk about the biggest expense that we have. If we look at the expenses at Twin Eagles, is golf course maintenance at 3.7 million. There's nothing else even close to that in terms of what that expense is. And we're golf centric and we're golf driven at Twin Eagles, and that's what the members enjoy. And we can see at the bottom that there's a deficit to that when we take depreciation into account. And when I talk about the clubs are break even, I'm pulling that depreciation out of that number. So that's depreciation is a non-cash item, as I think most people understand. So the clubs are break even, not using depreciation in terms of that. We got to cover that with costs. Now, gross profit, these are charged. Twin Eagles is on the left. So we are in the member dues business at Twin Eagles. 85% of the gross profit at Twin Eagles comes from membership dues. 15% of gross profit comes from golf operation. The average club is on the right. You can see the average club is at 74%. 3/4 of the income, gross profit in the industry, comes from dues. Same at Twin Eagles, slightly higher at Twin Eagles, slightly more golf driven. This was the club at turnover. The club at turnover had 10.6 million in operating revenue. Twin Eagles is a large club. The median club in our database is 8.7. So Twin Eagles at 10.6 million at turnover a couple of years ago. But that gold line was the capital income. The capital income at turnover for the year was $24,000. And it was, you were in the second percentile. You didn't have a capital engine. Twin Eagles had to create that capital income. And I want you to look, those lines line up. The median club at 8.7 million was generating $1.3 million in capital income. So Twin Eagles generating 24 was at a competitive disadvantage, and the board and the finance committee and the members have to close that gap as we go forward. When we look at sources of capital funding, again, Twin Eagles is on the left. This is the turnover slide. On the right is the capital sources available to a club. And this is actually data information. And I'm going to focus on the right pie slice. 36% generally comes from initiation fees, 21% from assessments, 29% from capital dues at the average club. On the left, at turnover, you can see that Twin Eagles had 100%. Fundamentally, there's some accounting things that took 6% on the initiation fees, which were the transfer fees at turnover. But fundamentally, Twin Eagles didn't have any capital sources like the other clubs. So we had to develop those as we go forward. We fast forward to turnover to today, and we're at $12 million. And last year we generated $1.4 million in capital income. So in that 3-year period, we've created $1.4 million in capital. And as you can see there, we need to continuously drive that number up because we know that depreciation number is going to continue to increase. And we invest in the facility, we're going to have to create more capital to keep up with that investment as we go forward. In the 75th percentile, the operating revenue is at 14 million, and those clubs are generating 2.348 million in capital income. And that's Twin Eagles is headed towards those numbers as we go forward. And we need to plan that, and the finance committee is looking at that and planning for that. When we look at the proportion of fixed operating expenses, again, this represents Twin Eagles on the left and the average club on the right. And you can see this is what the business model of clubs are. And this tells the story. And the data, which is the green pie chart there, shows golf course maintenance. 46% of the operating expense at the club at Twin Eagles is spent on course maintenance. So this is fixed operating expenses. At the typical club, 31% is generated. The yellow pie slice is sports and recreation. At the average club, 12% of fixed expenses go towards that. At Twin Eagles, 2% goes towards that. At Twin Eagles, 14%, which is that red pie slice, goes to golf ops labor. And in the average club, it's 10%. So what does that story show? That story shows that Twin Eagles is golf-centric in terms of that. The numbers show that as we go forward, as we look at that. And we don't generally say good or bad in that. It's important that you understand that as you go forward. Now, for a residential community, The trend is to increase that sports and recreation percentage from 2% up to 12%. And we can show you data to support that that's a good idea as we go forward. Now, one of the big lightning rods in clubs is food and beverage, and members have a hard time because they're not educated on the food and beverage in the club business. But 80% of the clubs in the industry generate a deficit, a food and beverage deficit. Matter of fact, you have to get way over to the right in order to do that. 20% generate a food and beverage surplus. Now, I might say to you, which side of that chart do you think you would want to be on as a board member, as a house committee person, as a member? Would you want to be on the right side of that chart or the left side of that chart in terms of member experience and the financial stability of the club going forward? And I want you to think in your mind which side of that will be in, because I think I'll surprise you here a little bit. When we look at food and beverage net income and loss as a percentage of total food and beverage revenue, it really goes in the industry from 60-70% to 0% as you go there. It's an amenity across that. And what we say is it logical to think 80% of the clubs are inefficient or doing something wrong? And the answer is obviously no. The industry has described itself from a business model. So when we look at the food and beverage subsidy as a percentage of dues, and we break it into 4 quartiles, the punchline is the clubs that subsidize food and beverage the most, which means they lose the most money or they use the dues the most to subsidize that, are the healthiest because they have the most members at 511 there. They have the highest initiation fees and they have the highest member equity number. The right side, the clubs that actually make money in food and beverage, have the least number of members, the lowest initiation fees, and the lowest membership equity. So this is not our opinion. And then if we go to the capital, the net available capital, those clubs on the left side that support food and beverage have the highest net available capital number. They have the most to invest in capital. The clubs that make money in food and beverage are really struggling to fund as we go forward. And it's about choices. It's about what are the venues that are open, the number of meal periods, the service levels, pricing, and your mix in terms of that, because we have a fixed audience. There's only between 600 and 700 families at any one time available to use the club to do that, and you can't make money, or you don't want to be at Twin Eagles at the club making money, because in order to do that, the business model has to be different than what it currently is. It has to be driven by outside weddings and business, not open very much, low quality of food and high cost of food, just from a volume standpoint. The other thing I want to do is the employees are critical to the success of the club as we go forward. I pulled this out of the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, and under the red there, the unemployment rate in Naples in May was down to 3.7%. And in the industry gaining the most jobs is leisure and hospitality. So we're in May with a 3.7% unemployment rate. Can you imagine what it's going to be when we get to November or December or January, February of next year? It's critical we think about how we're going to recruit, train, staff, pay our employees in our business as we go forward. Mike mentioned the payroll. This was the payroll ratio at turnover of the club at 52%. The best of class in the industry is generating payroll at 61% in the 75th percentile, and it's the largest expense in the club. This payroll ratio is based on operating revenue, so the data shows that the employee from a percentage payroll standpoint does not match up to the operating revenue of the club. So that either means one of a number of things. We're either underpaying people, or we don't have enough people, or we're as efficient as any club in the country in terms of that. And I think we know what the answer to that as we go forward. So lessons learned from this, I kind of summarize them. Dues are your highest source of operating revenue, and Twin Eagles is doing great about that. You've done a great job at that at turnover. Food and beverage is an amenity, not a profit center. The capital ledger, the balance sheet, is the most important part of that to grow the net worth of the club. The operating ledger is tactical. It's very important. It's very important for that member experience, but it doesn't move the club forward financially. But it is very important for membership satisfaction. You can never have too much capital. The best clubs in the world are capital engine machines. They create capital engine, millions of dollars of capital to reinvest. That's the business that we're in. At Twin Eagles, we took on some debt. That's serious. It's $22 million. We had to have money in order to build the facility, but debt is an issue. We use that to leverage that. We pay back that, and we have to create capital. Clubs are very capital intense, and clubs reducing initiation fees and capital fees, you have a hard time bringing them up. The clubs that are have great capital engine, have great capital fees, are the ones that are doing great. You can't cut your way to success. If that was true, the clubs with the lowest dues would have the highest initiation fees, and that's just not true. We've got to really focus on satisfaction and communication, which we're doing here. We've got to focus on the member experience and physical asset. In order to have a great member experience, you got to have a great asset, and you got to have great service from the staff. Those two things are really important. You got to have great succession planning. And guess what? Guess who gets to run the club? The members get to run the clubs. So it's really important that our members understand, because they're the future officers and board members and committee members as we go forward. You got to respect that line between the board and management. There's a sign at Twin Eagles, stay in your lane, right? Let the managers manage. Let the members be members. Let the board be strategic. And as we go through the growing pains of a turnover, it's really important that we do that. Use your time as precious, right? We know time is precious. There's only so many hours in the day, so we have to focus on what's really important in the industry, and it's that net worth and member experience, and then understand what the business is. You know, in a typical year, we get the reciprocal programs. There's 160 clubs in the county. You can go in Naples and see best of class of anything and learn what the best practices are and employ them as we go forward. So these are kind of the core values and best practices. I think that takes us to about 4:22. And I'll stop there, and we'll share this with everybody, and I'll turn it back over to Doug and Mike.
Jim, thank you so much for that very educational presentation. I know all the members who participated on this call and the ones who are going to see it going forward are going to have a much better grasp on the club business model and how it relates to Twin Eagles. And, you know, looking at the amount of time that we consumed with this, what we're going to do is we're going to take all the questions we received, and we appreciate everybody that put in a question. We're going to summarize those, put an attachment to that with the link to this email or to this presentation, and send that out to everybody so everyone has an opportunity to see that presentation and some of the questions that were asked. Mr. Iannuzzi, I know you've been silent this whole time. Is there anything you wanted to add? I didn't want you to be taken off the call without at least saying hi.
No, that was a great presentation. You know, as I was oriented or began my orientation onto the board, one of the first presentations I had was from Jim, and I didn't realize how much I didn't know about the club business until Jim presented this to us. It was an eye-opener for me, and one of the things Mike Chaffee and I had a lot of discussion on since joining the board was about what do we do for members to bring them up to speed with really trying to understand this model, and then that'll help the members then understand some of the decisions that are being made by management and by the board to try to drive capital and drive that member experience. So Mike and I view this as kind of step one of this educational experience and really helping you gain an understanding of Twin Eagles, and most importantly, how we how we benchmark ourselves against the industry and some of the industry standards. So I think it's a really, really great presentation, and I just value what Jim brings to the party here, and really helps us keep a perspective of what's important and things we should be focusing on as a board and a management team. So I'm hoping that the membership got a lot out of this. I know there was a lot of information here. This is the third or fourth time I've heard it, and I learn something new every time. Jim, just one quick question that I have, and I think you addressed this somewhere along the way. I hear this quite a bit. From a food and beverage standpoint, can you comment, or what's kind of the industry standards, or maybe from our peer group, on minimums? That comes up all the time. Should we be enforcing minimums to help drive members in to utilize some of the services and hopefully offset some of the deficits that you have in food and beverage? And since that's kind of a critical topic, I'm wondering, we have maybe 3 minutes left here. You can just comment on that real quick.
Yeah, the minimums were something that originated, in the northern clubs, and to get people to come and use the clubs. At club benchmarking, in the particular situation that Twin Eagles is in, if we had our druthers, we would rather see food and beverage minimum be used and slid over to the capital income, because the club is at a deficit on the capital side and starting out and trying to build that up. In a seasonal club, we think that the experience should drive the members coming in to want to use the food and beverage experience, not a forced hand in order to do that. It's highly debated, John, as you know, and we go in front of that. But in a situation in Florida where it's a community club, high golf, where people are at the club all the time, we need to really focus on that, delivering that member experience where the members want to come in, have the services and the amenities and the events that they want. We would much rather see you take that money and plow it into capital to move the club forward, especially with the position where the club is at right now.
Great, super. Thank you, Jim.
Excellent. Mr. Chafee, do you have anything to add before we let these members go who've spent time with us?
Yeah, I just want to thank Jim. I think that presentation was fantastic, and similar to you, Mr. Iannuzzi, personally, every time I hear that, I pick up, something new and an important benchmark that we can put in our arsenal to make sure that we are growing and building and strengthening the financial position here at Twin Eagles, and delivering, that membership experience, which is the ultimate goal. And we know that that the payroll number blows me away every time. That's clearly where we need to invest, and we have the plan here to do it. And fortunately, as we talked about, our dues are in a position where we can support that. In what we'll end up seeing is a significantly elevated membership experience, and again, just adding value back to the membership here at Twin Eagles.
Excellent. Couldn't have put it better myself, Mike. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, and as we build that culture at Twin Eagles for the team as well as the membership. Have a great afternoon.